The cowboy married the widow, then found a baby under her bed. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days when Eli Ward brought his new wife home, and the mud clung to the wagon wheels like it didn't want to let them go. The cabin stood small against the dark ridge, one window glowing faintly where the fire waited. Mara stepped down first, her black dress still too neat for a frontier widow, her eyes quiet in that way that hides both gratitude and secrets. Eli had married her the way a man sometimes repairs something broken, not for beauty, but for purpose. "You'll be warm here," he said simply, guiding her inside, the wood stove humming low and the smell of cedar heavy in the air. She moved slow, touching things like they might vanish, table, chair, the single photograph by the mantel. He watched her, unsure if she was made of glass or stone, and thought how strange it was that silence could sound like belonging. When he stepped back out to fetch the last trunk, the sound came, a faint cry, thin as a wind whistle but too alive to ignore. He froze, every muscle in his back tight. It came again, softer this time, from beneath the floor. Eli dropped to one knee, pressing his ear against the boards. The fire popped once behind him, and Mara's voice carried low, almost pleading. "Leave it be." He looked up, meeting her eyes in the flicker light, and saw something raw there, fear, not of him, but of being known. "What's down there?" he asked. She shook her head, tears already catching the glow. "Not what? Who?" He stared at her for a long beat, the rain tapping the roof like a clock running out, then reached for his knife in the nearest floorboard. The cry came again, closer now, real and fragile, and for the first time since the war, Eli's heart forgot how to be cold. The board lifted with a groan of nails, and the truth stared back, a baby wrapped in a tattered quilt, eyes wide and unblinking, as if it had been waiting for him. Mara fell to her knees, her voice breaking into the storm's rhythm. "I was going to tell you. Tomorrow." Eli lifted the child, wet and trembling, holding it against his chest where his heartbeat still remembered how to answer. "Tomorrow's too late," he said softly. The rain slowed outside, the fire steadied, and somewhere deep inside that small room, the west held its breath. By morning the storm had eased into a gray hush, leaving the world slick and shining as though it had been newly built. Eli sat by the hearth, shirt sleeves rolled, holding the baby against his bare chest beneath a wool blanket, while the child's tiny hand gripped his finger like it had known him forever. Mara moved about the kitchen without sound, her face pale and her hair unpinned, the look of someone who'd run out of ways to hide. "He's hungry," Eli said quietly, though he already knew she'd been up half the night feeding him in secret before their wedding. She stopped mid-step, hands trembling over the basin, water reflecting the weak daylight. "His name's Sam," she whispered finally. "He's 8 months." Eli nodded, eyes fixed on the flames. "Who was his father?" The question hung there like smoke that didn't want to rise. She took a breath so shallow it almost didn't happen. A man who didn't stay. He didn't press further. The West was full of ghosts, with names that didn't need repeating. The baby stirred, cooing softly, the sound breaking through the silence like birdsong in winter. Eli adjusted the blanket and said, almost to himself, "Ain't his fault he's here." Mara turned toward him, eyes wide, a tear breaking loose. "You're not angry?" He met her gaze steadily, voice low but sure. "Anger don't build a home." He rose then, settling the baby into the cradle by the fire, one he'd made years ago with hands that had built nothing for love until now. She watched him kneel beside it, rough fingers brushing the quilt edges smooth, and something in her began to loosen, the kind of ache that comes from being forgiven without asking. Outside, the sun broke through for the first time in days, lighting the valley in silver and gold. Eli stepped to the window, looking out over the ridge where mist clung like memory. "We'll need milk," he said, turning back, "and wood enough for the week." She nodded, voice small. "You'll stay?" "I gave you my word," he said simply. The baby gurgled, the fire crackled, and the cabin's walls seemed to breathe again. Mara knelt beside the cradle, tracing a finger along the quilt's frayed edge, whispering, "He's never had light on his face this long." Eli smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep it there." He walked out onto the porch, boots sinking in the soft mud, the smell of wet earth and cedar filling his lungs. Behind him, he heard the faint hum of a lullaby, the first sound of peace in a house that had forgotten what it felt like. The world, for once, didn't seem so cruel. 2 days later, the wind shifted warm, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pine from the ridge and the sound of hooves on the main trail. Eli was chopping wood when he saw the rider crest the hill, a stranger in a dark coat, horse-lathered, the kind of man who didn't waste a journey on guessing. Mara was on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, the baby asleep in her arms. The stranger slowed when he saw them, tipping his hat with the stiff courtesy of trouble coming polite. "Mornin'," he called, voice dry as old tobacco. "Name's Vance. I'm looking for a widow, Mara Lyle." Eli lowered the axe, setting the next log in place like the question didn't belong to him yet. "You found her," he said finally. Vance dismounted slow, dust rising around his boots. His eyes found the baby, and something mean flickered there, too quick for most men to catch, but Eli saw it plain. "So that's the one," Vance muttered. Mara's face drained of color. "What do you want?" she asked. He smiled without warmth. "Just settling accounts. The boy's daddy owed me more than whiskey." Eli stepped forward, axe in hand, though not lifted. "Debt's a man's burden, not a child's." Vance chuckled. "Maybe. But debts run in blood where I'm from." Mara clutched the baby tighter, whispering, "Go." The stranger ignored her, eyes on Eli now, measuring his size, his quiet, his calm. "You her new husband?" "I am." "Then you best learn what you bought." The words hit the air like spurs against stone. Eli didn't flinch. "Ain't bought, chose," Vance sneered. "You'll regret that." The wind picked up, flapping the stranger's coat, the smell of sweat and iron filling the space between them. Eli spoke low, steady. "You got two choices, mister. Leave that horse pointed downhill or stay long enough to see what happens when a man threatens what's mine." For a heartbeat, nothing moved, the kind of stillness that decides whether a story ends or begins. Vance finally spit into the dirt, muttered something under his breath, and swung back into the saddle. "She'll find me if she changes her mind," he said, turning away. Eli watched him ride until the trees swallowed him whole. Then he set the axe aside and turned to Mara, whose eyes shimmered with old fear and new disbelief. "You don't owe him nothing," Eli said softly. "Not anymore," she nodded, trembling. "He won't stop." Eli looked toward the dark line of the ridge where the stranger had gone and said, "Then neither will I." The baby stirred, a soft sound cutting through the silence, and for a moment, even the wind seemed to wait for Eli Ward to finish what he'd started. By evening, the sky burned red behind the ridge, the kind of sunset that feels like the earth warning you to stay awake. Eli sat on the porch sharpening his knife, while Mara rocked the baby beside the fire, the soft creak of the chair keeping time with the wind. Neither had spoken much since the stranger left, but silence between them no longer felt hollow. It felt like something being built carefully, one heartbeat at a time. When the baby finally slept, Mara stepped out to where Eli worked, her face half lit by the glow from inside. "He'll come back," she said quietly. Eli didn't look up. "I know. He's cruel," she whispered. "Cruel men always think fear's the same as power." Eli set the knife down, his voice low, even. "He'll find out it ain't." She looked at him then, really looked, and realized how different this man was from every promise that had ever hurt her. "Why do you help me?" she asked. "Because no one helped me when I needed it." The wind pushed through the pines, scattering sparks from the chimney. She stood close enough to feel the warmth off his shoulders, to smell the cedar and smoke clinging to his skin. "You think mercy makes you strong," she said softly. "I think it's the only thing that ever has," he answered. A coyote howled far off and the baby stirred. Mara turned, but before she reached the door, the sound of hooves broke the stillness again, this time from the ridge, faster, heavier, like trouble returning with intent. Eli's hand went to his rifle leaning by the wall. "Get inside," he said. She froze. "Eli, now." He stepped off the porch, boots sinking in the wet dirt, eyes fixed on the three riders cresting the hill, Vance and two others, shadows against the dying light. The lead horse snorted, hooves churning mud, and Vance called out, voice slick with anger. "You think you can hide what's mine?" Eli raised the rifle but didn't aim it yet. You're talking about people like their property. That's where you're already lost. Vance laughed, sliding off his horse. Maybe I just take what I came for. The other men shifted, uncertain. The light hit Eli's face then, the scar along his cheek, the calm in his eyes. And something about it slowed them down. Ain't nothing under this roof that belongs to you, Eli said. And if you keep talking, you'll learn that truth closer than you want. Vance's hand twitched toward his belt, but before metal showed, Eli fired. A single shot, warning clean into the dirt between them. The sound, cracked through the valley, sent the crows up screaming. That was your mercy, Eli said. You won't get another. Vance glared at him, the fury of a man too small for his hate, then jerked his reins and spat in the mud. You just made yourself a mark, Ward. Then make it deep, Eli said, lowering the rifle. That way I don't forget who to thank when it's done. The three turned and rode off into the dark, leaving the air heavy and sharp as steel. Mara stepped onto the porch, shaking. Eli exhaled slow, the tension bleeding from his shoulders. It's over for now, he said, voice rough. For now? She whispered. He looked at the horizon, where the fire-red light had gone to ash. Storms always circle back before they quit. He picked up the axe again. More to steady his hands than for work, and the sound of the baby crying inside told him what mercy was worth keeping alive. The next morning rose pale and cold, the kind of light that made everything look honest whether you wanted it to or not. Eli hadn't slept. He'd sat in the chair by the door all night, rifle across his knees, listening to the soft rhythm of Mara's breathing and the baby's tiny sighs between dreams. The fire burned down to embers, and each time it cracked he thought it was hooves returning. When dawn finally touched the window, he rose, poured water from the basin over his face, and stepped outside. The air smelled of damp ash and pine. Down by the road, two sets of tracks still showed where Vance's men had turned back. He crouched, studying them the way a man reads a threat written in dirt. No hurry in their retreat, no fear yet, just planning. Inside, Mara stirred, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she came to the door. You'll have to tell the sheriff, she said. And what'll he do? Write a report no one reads. He'll make it law, she insisted. Eli shook his head. Law don't reach this far unless it wants something. She looked at him then, her voice breaking quiet. You can't protect us forever. He turned, eyes steady. Maybe not, but I can make it cost him everything to try. They spent the morning mending fences that didn't need mending just to keep their hands busy. The baby slept in a basket near the porch, sunlight turning his hair gold. Now and then, Eli caught Mara watching him, not with fear anymore, but with that slow, stunned look of someone remembering what safety feels like. Around noon, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, Sheriff Brandt, old and deliberate, his badge dull with dust. He dismounted heavy, boots creaking. Heard you had callers, he said, nodding at the ridge. 3 men, one of them Vance. Eli nodded. You know him? Too well. Card cheat, liquor runner, likes other folks' fear more than his own shadow. Brandt spit into the dirt, frowning. He'll come again, but he won't come alone next time. Then I'll be ready, Eli said. The sheriff studied him a moment, then said quietly, You're a good man, Ward. Don't turn mean trying to prove it. He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving the warning hanging in the air. That evening, Mara laid the baby in his cradle and sat beside Eli by the fire. When I first came here, she said softly, I thought all men wanted to own or forgive. You did neither. You just stayed. He looked into the flames. Sometimes staying is the hardest thing a man can do. She reached over, touching his hand. And for once, he didn't pull away. The baby stirred then, a small sound that cut through everything false, and Eli smiled faintly. He's got lungs, he said. He's got hope, she answered. Outside, the wind carried the smell of smoke, not from their chimney, but from somewhere down the ridge. Eli rose, heart already knowing. He's burning the low pass, he muttered. Mara froze. To drive you out? To drive fear in. He grabbed his rifle, stepping onto the porch where the horizon glowed faintly orange. He wants me to come to him, Eli said, voice hardening. But he's forgotten one thing. Mara's voice trembled. What's that? He looked back at her, eyes steady, the firelight catching the scar along his jaw. A man with something to protect don't chase trouble. He makes it come to him. The baby cried once, sharp and alive, and the sound carried across the valley like a promise no storm could drown. The smoke over the valley. The fire from the ridge came by afternoon, rolling down through the dry grass in red waves, the sky turning the color of rust and warning. Eli stood on the porch with his rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes narrowed against the wind as smoke coiled low over the valley. Mara was inside packing what little they had, the baby strapped against her chest, his cries swallowed by the roar building beyond the trees. "He's driving us out," she said when she stepped onto the porch, fear bright in her eyes. Eli shook his head slowly. "He's driving himself into a corner." The smoke thinned for a breath, showing 3 riders again on the ridge, their outlines warped by heat. Vance was in front, coat whipping behind him like a flag for every bad thing that ever came looking for the good. Eli walked out into the yard, boots sinking in soft ash, and shouted, "You think fire'll scare me? You think burning a mountain makes you a man?" His voice cut through the noise, clear as steel. Vance's laughter echoed back, twisted by distance. "You can't save what's already ruined," he yelled. Eli chambered around but kept the rifle low. "Then watch me try." He turned to Mara. "Get inside, wet the blankets, keep the door sealed." She hesitated. "Eli, go," he said, gentle but final. She obeyed. The wind changed then, pushing the smoke toward the riders instead of the cabin, a sudden twist that felt almost chosen. Vance cursed, waving his men forward, but one pulled back, shouting something about the wind turning too fast. Eli took the chance, firing once into the air, a sound that cracked the valley open. The horses panicked, bolting sideways, and one of the riders went down hard, lost in the smoke. Vance wheeled his horse and glared down through the haze, his face streaked with soot. "This ain't over," he shouted. "It's never over." Eli's voice came back steady. "Then it's never yours." The fire began to eat its own path uphill, choking on what it had started, and within minutes the ridge flamed out, leaving only black smoke curling toward heaven. When silence came, it was the kind that carries weight. Eli lowered the rifle and walked back toward the cabin, every step heavy with exhaustion but clean of doubt. Mara met him at the door, eyes shining with relief, the baby quiet now, watching him like he already knew who safety looked like. "It's done?" she whispered. Eli nodded once. "For now." She touched his arm, fingers trembling. "I thought you'd die out there." He looked at her, soot-streaked and calm. "Dying ain't the hard part," he said softly. "Living decent after is." The wind shifted again, cool and sweet, the smoke rising high and thin into the clearing sky. Inside, the fire in the hearth still burned, small but alive, and Eli Ward finally let himself breathe. The night the ridge went silent. Darkness fell over the valley like a second storm, thick and breathless, and the smell of burned grass still hung in the air. Eli hadn't sat down once since the fire. He'd been circling the cabin, checking every fence post and ridge shadow for movement. Mara watched him from the window, her face pale in the lamplight, the baby asleep against her shoulder, both safe yet trembling from what safety cost. "You can't stay awake forever," she whispered when he finally came inside. He hung his rifle by the door, shoulders heavy, eyes still scanning the dark like he could hear trouble thinking. "Maybe I can tonight." She set the baby in the cradle and stepped closer, her voice low. "You don't have to fight the world alone." He smiled faintly, more sorrow than humor. "It keeps finding me anyway." The fire crackled, throwing thin shadows across the walls, and outside, the coyotes started up their song, long, lonesome notes that sounded too much like memory. Mara sat near him, pulling her shawl tighter. "You think he's gone?" she asked. Eli's jaw clenched. "Men like Vance don't disappear. They rot close by until someone gives them a reason to." She nodded, staring into the flames. "Then promise me if he comes again, you won't meet him angry." He turned to her, eyes softening. "Anger's done with me. What's left is something quieter." The wind pressed against the door, the baby murmured, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse neighed once, distant but real. Eli rose again, grabbed the lantern, and stepped outside without a word. The night was wide and silver, the stars sharp against the black, the earth still steaming in places where the fire had kissed it. He walked to the edge of the field, the world so still it felt holy, and listened. Nothing. No hooves, no breath, just the slow cooling of a land learning peace again. Behind him, Mara appeared in the doorway, lamp in hand. "Eli," she called softly, "come in." He turned, meeting her eyes across the dark, and the way the light wrapped around her face felt like a promise the world was finally ready to keep. He walked back slow, boots crunching frost, and when he stepped inside, she closed the door gently, locking it not out of fear but of finality. The baby sighed, the fire hummed, and for the first time in a long while, Eli Ward felt something that might one day grow into rest. The return in the rain. The rain came again 3 nights later, quiet at first, then steady, washing the ridge clean as if the earth itself wanted to forget the fire. Eli sat by the window with his rifle nearby, the baby asleep in Mara's arms on the rug, both of them bathed in the orange hum of the hearth. The sound of rain on the roof was soft, almost kind, and for a moment the cabin felt like it belonged to peace. Then came the knock, 2 dull thuds against the wood, slow and heavy. Mara froze. Eli rose without haste, checking the window. Through the curtain of rain stood a figure on horseback, hunched, hat low, coat dripping black water. He opened the door halfway, voice low and even. "You lost?" The man looked up, and even through the shadows, Eli saw the ruin of Vance's face, eyes swollen from smoke, skin burned raw, pride still burning hotter. "You did this," he rasped. "Fire turned on you," Eli said. "Not me." Vance dismounted, stumbling as his boots sank into mud. "I came for what's mine." Eli stepped out onto the porch, blocking the door. "Ain't nothing here with your name on it." "The woman, the child, the peace you think you earned, all of it, you took from me." "I took nothing," Eli said quietly. "You just never built any of your own." The rain thickened, running down the steps like melted silver. Vance's hand twitched toward his coat, the glint of a pistol barely showing, and Eli moved before the thought finished. The rifle butt cracked against Vance's wrist, sending the gun into the mud. They struggled for a heartbeat, the sound swallowed by rain and thunder. Eli pushed him back, the 2 men breathing hard, faces inches apart. "You don't have to do this," Eli said. "You can still walk away." "You don't get to decide that." Vance swung, wild, desperate, and Eli caught his arm, forcing him down until the mud covered his knees. For a second, the world held still except for the rain, and Eli saw it all, the hate, the hunger, the small boy that cruelty had never let grow up. He could end it. He could let the rage finish what mercy always left undone. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, voice low and certain. "You wanted me angry? I'm not. That's your loss." Vance looked up, something breaking in his eyes, not pain, understanding. He sagged, the fight gone, then staggered to his feet, backing toward his horse. "You'll regret sparing me," he muttered. "Already lived through worse," Eli answered. The man climbed back into the saddle, rain running off his hat brim, and rode into the dark without turning back. Eli watched until even the sound of hooves faded. When he stepped inside, Mara was waiting, eyes full of everything she hadn't dared hope. "You didn't kill him?" she whispered. Eli shook his head. "Killing don't end anything, but maybe mercy does." She looked at him, the firelight trembling in her gaze, and for the first time since that first storm, she smiled without fear. The rain softened outside, the baby stirred, and Eli Ward finally let the night wash the ashes from his soul. The morning after. Mercy dawn came slow and pale, the kind that arrives quiet enough not to wake the broken things. The storm had passed, leaving the ground heavy and glistening, each blade of grass bowed with dew. Eli stepped outside barefoot, the porch cool beneath him, breathing in the clean air that followed forgiveness. The ridge smoked faintly from the rain's touch on old fire scars, and the valley smelled of earth and pine sap, new life finding a way through ash. Behind him, the door creaked, and Mara appeared, her hair loose, the baby balanced on her hip, both framed by the warm glow inside. "He's gone," she said softly. Eli nodded. "He won't come back." "You're sure?" "Not of much," he said, "but I know when hate runs out of places to sleep." She stepped down beside him, the baby laughing at the way the sunlight hit his hands. For the first time in months, the sound didn't echo against pain. It landed somewhere safe. Eli looked toward the field where he'd seen too much smoke, and in that golden haze, he saw it clear. Peace isn't given. It's earned, one small mercy at a time. Mara leaned against him, quiet as breath. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Don't. Just live like none of it was wasted." The baby reached out then, grabbing Eli's beard with a tiny fist and giggling until both of them laughed. The sound carried across the valley, scattering a pair of crows into the open sky, and the land that had burned now looked alive again. Eli's gaze followed the horizon, where the line between light and shadow was thinning, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a man waiting for the next fight, just a man still standing after it. Mara watched him, eyes bright with something she'd never had the right to imagine. "You think we get to keep this?" she asked. He looked at her, at the child, at the morning stretching wider than any vow, and said, "Only if we remember what it cost." The wind picked up, warm and steady, brushing the smoke smell away, leaving the world clean again. Behind them, the fire inside the cabin crackled softly, the same one that had outlasted storm, ash, and pride. Eli took Mara's hand, the baby between them, and together they walked back inside, the door closing behind, like the last chapter of an old hurt finally laid to rest. The light beneath their roof. Spring settled over the ridge like a promise finally kept, the air sweet with wet soil and blooming sage. Eli mended the fence line that morning, sleeves rolled, sweat shining on his arms while the baby crawled through patches of sunlight by the porch, laughing every time Mara scooped him up before he reached the mud. The cabin that had once echoed with storm and shouting now sounded like living. Hammer on wood, child's giggle, kettle hiss. Mara stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, watching him work, her eyes full of the kind of peace that doesn't ask for anything more. "Fence'll hold now," he said, leaning the hammer against the post. "So will we," she answered, smiling. He walked to her, boots soft on the grass, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the widow who'd learned to trust light again, and the man who'd finally stopped running from it. Inside, the baby tugged at the edge of a quilt on the floor, uncovering an old photograph of Eli's parents, faces faded but kind. He picked it up, holding it toward them as if returning something lost. Mara laughed softly. "Seems he's found our ghosts." Eli crouched, taking the picture, his thumb tracing the worn edge. "Or maybe he's just reminding us they're done following." He placed the photo on the mantel beside the feather from the pillow, the ring, the carved spoon, all the small things that had outlasted fear. Outside, the sky was the color of forgiveness, blue stretched wide and endless. Mara set the baby on her hip, resting her head against Eli's shoulder. "You think he'll remember any of this?" she asked. Eli smiled, watching the sunlight spill through the window. "He don't have to. It'll remember him." The wind swept through the open door, stirring the curtains, carrying the scent of bread and cedar, and for the first time, the place truly felt like home. The land that once held fire now held laughter. The man who once waited for storms now waited for supper. As evening fell, the baby slept in the chair that used to be Eli's, and Mara whispered, "You ever think peace could be this quiet?" He looked at her, the firelight painting her face in gold, and said, "Quiet's what grace sounds like." Outside, the night spread gentle and slow, the stars lighting the valley as if heaven itself approved. If this story reminded you that redemption doesn't come easy, but it always comes for those who choose mercy, and then share it so others remember too. Subscribe to Redemption West, where every wound learns to heal, every silence learns to speak, and every story proves that love still builds.